Good afternoon. I'm Barry Silverberg. I'm the Executive Director of the Center for Nonprofit Studies, Nonprofit Austin at Austin Community College. And I want to welcome you on behalf of myself and my colleagues, Ira Williams from Mission Capital and Piper Nelson from I Live Here, I Give Here. And the three of our organizations have come together to sponsor this presentation. And I'll describe our presenter. I'll introduce our presenter in a minute. But to allow us to learn as much as we can in the shortest amount of time, and we will end at 2:00. We've muted all of your microphones. And if we didn't succeed, please keep them muted so that we can hear Tiffany. Put your comments, questions in the chat. I will do as best as I can to raise as many of those after Tiffany finishes her presentation. And any we don't raise, we'll seek some further information from Tiffany to get back to you if it hasn't already been covered. If there is sufficient interest, we will do this again as circumstances warranted or as at some point in the future. This is being recorded, so all the people online here will receive a copy and of it, and also a PDF of the slides. I think that's all I need to say. I'm going to skip all the self-serving comments and move right to introducing our presenter so that we can get the maximum benefit from her. So our presenter is Tiffany Carter. Tiffany is the Public Policy Director and Counsel at the National Council of Nonprofits. And she works to advance public policy priorities for what is the nation's largest network of nonprofits. She focuses on all three levels of government and all three branches of government. She tracks and spots trends of policy threats and opportunities for nonprofits. I think we're in the stage of more threats than opportunities, but maybe she'll come up with an opportunity or two to give us some hope. She covers a wide range of those topics. I'm not going to bother mentioning them. Prior to joining the Council of Nonprofits, Tiffany worked with the Hawaii State Association and with nonprofit law enforcement at the Hawaii Office of the Attorney General and policymaking in the Hawaii State Legislature as a legislative attorney. She's also a member of the U.S. Supreme Court Bar, which I understand does not serve mixed drinks. But let me introduce her to speak and just tell her, as we say in Texas, aloha.
Aloha. Thank you, Barry. And are we okay with this, with my screen, or do I need to resave that or reshare? Let me know. We're good. Okay, I'm seeing a thumbs up. Okay. And I do need to also give you all an apology as I start. I have a sick 3-year-old behind me who is watching Moana right now. And hopefully Moana will suffice. But if I'm a little distracted or if I have to turn around, it's because I have to, fast forward through the scary parts of Moana. So please bear with me as I can. All right, so thanks for coming in Texas. We have a lot going on. In case you haven't noticed, things in DC are absolutely wild. And we're really busy right now. So I'm going to give you kind of the breakdown of what's happening. We like to, as Barry said, we work in all three branches of government, all three levels of government, legislative, executive, judiciary. We do it in that order because that's how the US Constitution sets it out. But it's easier to think of like kind of these threats and opportunities from that. So I do like to start with a disclaimer that I'm a lawyer. I'm not your lawyer. You really don't want me to be. This is not legal advice, but I try to give as many answers as possible that don't start with, well, it depends. So this is our network of state associations. As Barry just said, thank you, Nonprofit Austin and Mission Capital, for being members of our state association network. And thank you for I Live Here, I Give Here for also being a part of this today. So let's start with the legislative branch. Right now, we are in what is considered the kind of tax overhaul of this generation. So in 2017, they rewrote the tax code, and a lot of those provisions are ending at the end of this year, midnight on December 31st, 2025. And so while they overhauled it in 2017, the changes that are going to happen right now are kind of the ones that they're deciding to be permanent or not. And why I like to start with this is because this has been going on for a while. So once we get to the executive branch and what's happening with President Trump, that's new. This 2017 tax debate that is now turning into the 2025 tax debate has been happening for about a decade. Where we are right now is the Senate and the House are debating about what to do, and they've been claiming that they've known what they wanted to do for a while, but they are still debating it now about a year and a half later. And what they're debating between is what is either in the Senate, they're considering what's called a two-bill track, where they want to break up specifically immigration and border policies and then tax policy. The House is what is being called and has been dubbed the Big Beautiful Bill, the one big beautiful bill. Their term, not mine. And what this comes down to is between $1.5 trillion and $4.5 trillion of tax revenues, spending decisions, and tax policies that are going to affect all of you, whether you know it or not. Things that they're looking to do: extend the individual and corporate tax rates, extend the standard deduction, which is what they did in 2017. And how they're doing this is they have to find other ways to either raise revenues or cut spending, maybe to your types of programs, and increase taxes in other areas. We take no position on what the tax rate should be. They can do whatever they want with that. But what we get concerned about is whenever they start looking at nonprofits, things like endowment taxes, or increasing or reducing the ability for nonprofits to do fundraising, things like changing the estate taxes and IRA and all these other itty bitty things. That's how they're looking to actually be able to extend these other things, and that's where we get concerned. So we're in the middle of this. The timeline that we're looking at is they're trying to come up with top line numbers by Easter. The rule in DC is you always bet over. And then the debate is then going to go on through the summer. So right now we're looking at these two different bills. And what we're really concerned about, so the Senate is kind of what they're calling a skinny bill. It's really focused on border and immigration things. The House is looking at, they have what's called the tax menu, the reconciliation tax menu, and they have focused on things like removing tax exemption for hospitals, removing tax deductible donations for health clinics, cutting Medicaid, SNAP, school meals, increasing taxes on university endowments, certain taxes, going from 1.4% to 14%, which is a 10x change. So like those are really big issues that we're seeing in the nonprofit sector. So if you are in those kind of areas, stay tuned. We have more information for you in a little while, but we're trying to track this all from a legislative standpoint. Some big things in this that we are really, really concerned about is protecting nonprofit nonpartisanship. So this is the section of the tax code on 501c3 that says nonprofits cannot support or oppose candidates for public office. You all live this every day. Sometimes it's called the Johnson Amendment. We're trying to get away from that because it's confusing because we have Speaker Johnson. But it's the long-standing 70-year plus law that says nonprofits can't do partisan electioneering. They tried to get rid of this in 2017 in the 2017 tax law. We got it out at the 11th hour, literally like the night before it went to print, because of a Senate parliamentarian rule. Very wonky stuff, but we're hoping that that stands. Why I bring this up is because just this Monday, We are only on Wednesday this week. It's been a very long week. On Monday, they introduced standalone legislation that would weaken this provision in the tax code. And so we don't want it to then be included in something like the big tax bill. As I mentioned, some of these different provisions are focusing on different organizations that might remove their tax status or their ability to receive tax deductible donations. We want to protect that. Okay, thanks, Zoe. Sorry, my daughter is sharing a picture with me. Can you finish watching, please? Okay. All right, that's beautiful. I have to keep finishing this. Okay. So next up, we have a charitable giving. You can see a little hand here. We want to increase charitable giving in all this. Zoe, mommy, I said that I have to finish this presentation, right? Do you want to sit with me and do this presentation? Okay, come on. Zoe's gonna join. This is my daughter, Zoe. Okay, not gonna join. So moving on, charitable giving. We want to be able to make sure that nonprofits are able to, oh, you want to see what she drew? Here, I'll actually, we can do a little break here. She drew a beautiful picture of what's going on. All right. Oh, it's ripped. We'll fix that later. Okay. Thanks everyone for the love. It's a, parenting in this day and age. So charitable giving. This is a big thing where we want to, as we're seeing all these other stresses and threats to the sector, we want to increase charitable giving. We want to do this by providing a non-itemizer tax deductible donation to nonprofits, regardless of how much you make or what kind of tax form you fill out. So right now, there are two types of tax forms. You can either take the standard deduction or you can itemize your deductions. 91% of people take the standard deduction after the 2017 tax law, which means only 9% of people get a tax deductible donation if they donate to nonprofits. We want to open that up. So whether you take the standard deduction or if you take the you itemize, you can still take a tax deductible donation. And that is under what's called the Charitable Act. And it actually has a lot of momentum right now in including it in the tax bill. Just good news. The other thing is disaster relief. We know disasters are happening. They're going to keep happening. And it's very unfortunate that they're still happening. So we want to be able to increase charitable giving in disaster areas. So it's kind of a low-hanging fruit, but we are seeing some momentum there. So that's what's happening in the legislative branch. Let me turn to the executive branch. So right now, President Trump has signed over 100 executive orders. So just to level set, executive orders, every single president since Washington has signed one. They're usually used to do things like set up the government, set up the cabinet, do some policy. It's the way for the president to use the power of the pen to circumvent the legislature. Very common. What is not common is right now, President Trump has already done over 100. That is an enormous number. Most do a handful. He did over 60 within like the first 24 hours. And the breadth of topics that he has hit is pretty astounding. Everything from DE&I to voting to public service loan forgiveness. This has all happened very, very quickly. I think we're only in day like 75 or something, 72 of his presidency, and he has signed so many executive orders. So this is reshaping how president executes the office of the president as the leader of the executive branch, which is keeping things very, very busy. I know it's a lot of information to parse through. And so we have a handy dandy chart that we're updating. I think we're going to update it again today on kind of the executive orders that affect nonprofits. And I'm going to go through just a couple, like 2 or 3 right now. So the first ones are kind of this diversity, equity, and inclusion grouping of there's a handful of them. There's really 2 that are really big and are affecting nonprofits. And those are the orange ones that you see, this ending illegal discrimination and ending radical wasteful government. The thing to know about them is that they keep using the term diversity, equity, and inclusion, but it's not defined. And so they also removed a provision that President Johnson in 1964, right? Then President Johnson, that's why Johnson is very confusing, signed that require non-discrimination provisions in federal contracting. They keep referring to anti-discrimination laws. And the problem with this is that they're basically rewriting what constitutes anti-discrimination, but we don't know what that means. They haven't, it's kind of this free for all on what they might consider, what the administration might consider to be anti-discrimination versus what has previously been in law. So it's very confusing right now. There's also a couple provisions in these executive orders that specifically affect nonprofits. So the first one is if you do DE&I, diversity, equity, and inclusion work, a lot of those contracts and grants have been eliminated. All of the offices in the government have been eliminated. So if you did training or worked with them, a lot of those have been closed. And then there's this other aspect of like investigating private organizations, including, quote, large nonprofits, not defined, we don't know what large constitutes, and higher education that do DE&I work. So this has been an ongoing thing. I'm going to get to it in a minute, but they did tell each agency to investigate up to 9 different groups in this, but we don't know what constitutes agencies. We think there are about 20, but depending on what part of law you are, it might be a department or an agency. And then each of those are supposed to do 9. So we're looking at like a couple hundred investigations, but we don't know where that's going to go, and those haven't been listed yet. And that's in addition to the things that have happened. So I'm going to get to that in 1 minute. The other thing is to review all these financial assistance programs that would go to different groups. So whether it's DE&I funded or not, there is this question of like reviewing federal funding. This came to a head on January 27th. OMB, the Office of Management and Budget, which is kind of like the infrastructure of the federal government, issued a memo saying, we want you to temporarily pause all activities. And they didn't say how long a temporary pause would be. They just said, we're going to temporarily pause all funding. And this resulted in about $3 trillion of funding immediately stopped. They wanted it to be reviewed within 22 hours. And that would affect enormous amounts of nonprofits. About a quarter of nonprofits receive federal funds, and about a third of all nonprofit revenues are earned through government grants and contracts at all levels of government. So while there was this kind of focus on DE&I, circling back to the previous screen, there also that got spread out to all federal funding, regardless of what that funding was being used for, including to nonprofits. So that's where we stepped in. So there are, as of today, over 160 lawsuits challenging the more than 100 executive orders. There are more than 60 preliminary injunctions out there. A lot of those are nationwide preliminary injunctions. And we have 2 of these lawsuits. So one was against this memo that was freezing the $3 trillion worth of funding. That's for both nonprofits and for-profit funding grants and contracts. And we have a preliminary injunction on that. The second one is this Luna Squatucket, I can never pronounce it, group. We have signed on as a co-plaintiff in that one, and that's out of Rhode Island. And we are asking for a preliminary injunction there as well. So what is a preliminary injunction? Preliminary injunction is a court-ordered relief saying that we're going to pause the implementation of this order, executive order, in our sense, the OMB memo, while the courts consider the legality of the underlying issue. So while the courts consider the legality of the OMB memo, or under the second lawsuit, the legality of freezing funds under specifically the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act and the Inflation Reduction Act. I always have to pause because there's 2 I words in there. So under the first one, we saw all this funding, this $3 trillion funding paused immediately. And so we filed a lawsuit to open it back up, and a lot of those funding started flowing again. However, we heard of a lot of funding under the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, and the IIJA still being paused. So that's why we filed the second lawsuit that is now going to Rhode Island tomorrow, in hopes that that funding will be opened up as well. This just kind of brings in this bigger question of the separation of powers between the executive and the legislative branch. Who has the power to, once Congress has actually approved this funding and sent it out the door, can the executive branch spit, cut it off, review it, or in some cases claw it back, which is what we're actually hearing right now. And so this question of between the executive branch and the judicial branch when it comes to actual money is crucial. The second piece of it that we just saw this week, this is brand new information. Now there's a question of the judiciary and the powers between the executive branch and the judicial branch. And so President Trump has been saying that courts shouldn't have the ability to issue these preliminary injunctions. And so now the legislature is getting involved, and there was legislation that was introduced this week on Monday by Senator Grassley to limit the judicial relief and limit preliminary injunctions just to the court that it's in. So while we have a preliminary injunction that's nationwide, meaning all this funding is supposed to continue, be reopened up and continue. What they're trying to do is limit it to just either maybe just us as plaintiffs or just the state that it's being filed in. And so that legislation was just introduced this week. So you're going to start seeing, we are seeing the separation of powers coming to a head. What I do want to mention is that this preliminary injunction that we won on the first case does stop OMB from implementing, giving effect to, or reinstating under a different name the directive to halt federal spending policy. So because it's a broad OMB memo and it is a broad injunction, the administration is not supposed to go around our backs, do something else, keep doing it, but call it something else. However, we are seeing concerns about different funding streams. And so that's why we filed the second lawsuit. It's very narrow in where we're seeing relief and where we're seeing the administration circumvent relief, which is why we filed the second lawsuit. But we are seeing the administration become a little bit more creative with how they are able to claw back or stop funding. One of the examples that we've seen just recently is with food banks. I don't know if there's anyone on the line who's in the food bank area, and with emergency food for homeless shelters and those types of relief organizations. So funding that was actually appropriated, reauthorized just last week or 2 weeks ago in the continuing resolution, some of that funding's been cut off. And so this is why I'm saying that the separation of powers and who's going to step in and force one of the branch's hands is going to be really important. The other thing I want to mention about the DE&I executive orders is there is this question of, going back to a couple slides ago, what does diversity, equity, and inclusion mean? What constitutes illegal activities under DE&I? And that question is being considered by the court right now. So there was a preliminary injunction issued out of Maryland saying it could be unconstitutional. This term could be really vague. It actually probably is harmful to nonprofits specifically and penalizing nonprofits for just working in the communities they work in. And so Maryland issued a preliminary injunction. However, the Fourth Circuit then overruled that preliminary injunction and said, we're going to let the administration move forward with this, and we'll see how it plays out. Why I bring this up is that this is very, very crucial when it comes to the types of work that your organizations do and which populations you serve. So the court, in the Maryland court, the district court, in issuing the preliminary injunction, gave this example. If a road construction grant is used to fill potholes in a low-income neighborhood instead of a wealthy neighborhood, does that render it equity related? And that, I think, is a perfect example of why these executive orders is so confusing and why the term diversity, equity, inclusion and the term anti-discrimination are really confusing for people who are actually doing this work every day, right? And so the courts are now considering that, and this case is moving forward, and hopefully we'll get some clearer information as we go forward. But we don't know the answers to that right now. So what's really going on? I just added this in because I wanted to kind of connect the dots and put this all together on where we're at and what we're seeing with, as Barry mentioned, these threats and opportunities. I will say that there is this bigger picture of the threats to the nonprofit sector, and then this question of the subsectors within the nonprofit sector. Groups like immigration services, they've been tied up in this, not just from this administration, but for many, many years, right? Colleges and universities are having a lot of questions right now on like First Amendment rights, and not just like freedom of speech, but also freedom of assembly and freedom of working together, and then what I'm looking for, freedom of the press is being attacked, right? There's a lot of funding that's being removed from the universities right now, like tens of billions of dollars from especially the Ivy League universities, Columbia, Harvard. There is a lot of money being removed by the research and groups that are in research, not just in universities, but elsewhere. Recently, in the last like 2 weeks, there's been a lot of questions on big foundation endowments, like groups like Ford, for example, or Gates. So those are kind of these attacks on like independent nonprofits that are not part of government. There's also another question of organizations that receive a lot of federal funding or are, I wouldn't say arms of the government, because they are individual 501c3s, but are very closely related to the government. Groups like the Smithsonian and the Institute of Peace and libraries. There's been overhauls on leadership in those organizations. I just heard today that there is a question of losing funding in the National Endowment of the Humanities and National Endowment for the Arts. And so like these are specific nonprofits and specific nonprofit funding that is being removed right now. The other thing that you might be following the news is law firms and the legal community as a whole. So I just mentioned the preliminary injunctions and the concern of having restrictions on judiciary relief and action. There's also this related attack on big law firms and the ability of lawyers to actually present organizations that are filing these lawsuits. Why this matters is because there's a systematic whole of who can be represented and how they can be represented. And if law firms are, if lawyers are being attacked, those are the ones who are bringing these cases. I will also mention that there's also a chilling effect in these legal cases that one of the executive orders is requiring for the administration to ask for a bond, and in support of the administration. So the administration saying, well, if you are going to file against me, I want you to put up a bond for the amount. If you lose, we will get, because that's the harm that we would be caused, we, the administration. And in our case, in the OMB case, that would be $3 trillion, which is an insane amount of money. And our judge actually said that that would, quote, defy logic to require the nonprofits to put up a bond. But it's just one more scare tactic to remove organizations' ability to advocate for themselves in the judiciary. So I just gave a lot of like probably downer information, but there is something you can do. So I'm going to end with happy information and then we're going to go to questions. So what can you do? you can call your member of Congress, and this is extremely important, especially in Texas, because you actually have a lot of members who actually have a lot of say and are being listened to right now. So we are actually asking you to lobby and advocate on your own behalf. And it's not scary. It's really simple. You don't need to know all of the information that I just gave you. What you need to know, and what you already know, is what you do every day. We just want you to tell your story and explain your impact to your members of Congress and drive home the point that nonprofits are in their communities, serving their constituents, and that you serve a purpose. And so they shouldn't be, whenever they're making these big decisions, like, the tax debate, like where should, the role of the legislative branch in the separation of powers, they need to remember that nonprofits matter in those decisions. And so that's what we want you to say. Spend less than 5 minutes. Don't be annoying. Be very helpful. And just talk about yourself. Talk about your organizations and the important it is. We can give you a script right here. You're going to get these slides. As Barry mentioned, we have the PDF of this. You can use this when you make the call. But all you have to do is talk about your organization, talk about your impact, share that you were professionals and volunteers in their community, serving their district and serving their constituents. Have a couple good, memorable numbers. We serve 300 meals 5 days a week. We we house 500 people 365 days a year. Keep it simple. It doesn't need to be a big number. It just needs to be an impactful number. And then ask for them to support nonprofits in their decision making. You can have all this. Here's a couple of quotes. If you get pushback, you don't need to get very in depth. But thank them for their time. Invite them to your organization. Show them what you do every day. Members like to see what's happening in their communities, and they are people that did go into public service to serve the public, and so you are a vessel for that, and it's really, really not scary. Here's a couple other framing considerations on this. I did see a question about, is this legal to call Congress with your community? Yes, I can say that with absolute authority. Nonprofits are able to advocate and lobby. We have lots of information on our website if you're concerned about this. All you have to do is, this is lobbying. Calling your member of Congress is considered lobbying. It is approved, allowed, and legal lobbying. And you just have to file it. Put a little note on your tax filings. I think you spent a few minutes on this. There will be a tiny little amount, and we have all that information on our website. So, but as for advocating and talking about your organization, you do that every day, and that is perfectly allowed as well. So just remember, you are the best messenger for your organization. No one knows your organization better than you do, and a phone call is the easiest, best, most impactful way to advocate with members of Congress. Here are some additional resources we have. They're all on our website. They're on our main page. You can just click on information on the executive orders and it will come up. So I'm going to stop sharing right now, sharing my screen so that I can see you and see the questions again. And Barry, I know that you were tracking the chat. So okay. I am here to answer as many questions as I possibly can.
Okay, Tiffany, first of all, thank you for a great presentation, really. You are so astounding, there's only a few questions. One, the most important is the obvious delight with what somebody called an intergenerational presentation. Let me look at the questions. You already answered the questions about the legality of advocating. Let me read this. For lots of us in Central Texas, our member of Congress is already supportive of protecting nonprofits. Should we call members of Congress that are near us but not be as supportive? And then let me combine that with the other question, is that will the members of Congress be more receptive because we're in their communities versus calling from one who isn't in our communities?
Yes, so sorry, we ended Moana, so for everyone who is going on the Moana train with us, we have ended Moana, and now we are going to Moana 2. So yes, if you're a member, if your member is with you and they have been supportive with you, call them again and thank them for their support. Keep that relationship, be strong with that relationship, appreciate their support. They need to hear from you well, I'm still hearing from them, like I know I'm on the right track, and it gives them talking points with their colleagues, right? So they can band together. As for other districts, they will listen to their constituents more than they will talk to you, right? So if you have friends in their districts, reach out to your friends and have them call their members. That is the best way to get to them. And I would say build coalitions, build partnerships, try to reach as many members as possible, but have someone in their district to reach out to them if you can.
You ready for another one?
There was one more. I wanted to make one more comment about this. If they seem to be oppositional to your cause, or maybe you don't have the best relationship with them, reach out to them and try to build those relationships. What do you want, sir? You don't want this. You want one or two? Two.
Can you, Tiffany, 1 second, can you tell us which congressperson you're talking to?
This is Zoe. She runs everything. We all know
Okay.
that.
All right.
So if they're oppositional to you, they are some of it is bluster, to be completely honest. Some of it is, riding the party line. And 1 second, Zoe, can you please be patient? 1 second. And they are looking, maybe they don't agree with your organization or they see you in the wrong light. But I would guess that something else that is being talked about right now, especially the separation of powers. No one goes to Congress to become irrelevant, right? They might be able to use, oh, well, I heard from this organization that I usually don't really agree with, but they're aligned with me on that we have the power of the purse, and maybe there is government overreach in some other area. So it allows them to chip away from some of these other arguments that are being made. And what we are hearing is that members of Congress are starting to get pretty upset about, from both sides of the aisle, about the executive overreach right now. And so still reach out, but maybe partner with others on the district. Next question.
So here's an interesting question. How should nonprofits that serve marginalized communities currently under attack talk about their impact and the people they serve in the community with our representatives?
Great question. We want you to be as specific as you can. Talk about the people that you serve. You can use the word marginalized, you can use underserved, but try to make it as personable as possible. Talk about Taylor, talk about Sam, talk about the person who you are actually serving. This goes to the example that I had from the Maryland District Court saying, we serve, if you're in a poor community versus a wealthy community, like those are still the people that you serve. And so there is nothing illegal about serving these different populations, right? So be as specific as you can and keep doing the work. Don't be afraid to do the work. And don't be afraid to talk about the people that you are actually helping.
So how do you anticipate all of this will impact nonprofits that do not receive any federal funds?
If you don't receive any federal funds, they need to hear from you even more. Okay, so they're using this whole framing of, well, nonprofits receive federal funds, so they should be treated the same as government, and basically they're government. Like that's their like logical reasoning. No one would say that about the trillions of dollars going to for-profit companies, right? for-profit companies, think construction, building roads, they get hundreds of millions of dollars each year from the federal government to build roads. But no one would say, well, they're an arm of the government. But they're trying to use that reverse logic to associate with nonprofits. 25% of nonprofits receive federal funding. That means 75% of nonprofits do not receive federal funding. And they need to remember, Congress needs to know that you are calling them as not receiving this funding and that you still serve a need in their community. So it's really important for them to hear from you.
Thank you. So Natalie Gray has put into the chat additional resources from Texas Nonprofit Strong. So please feel free to look at that. I'll include that in the summary, so for additional information. So another question, which relates to immigration and deportations. I already have artists who are calling with concerns for themselves and their families getting deported. What resources are there to help artists who are living in fear due to the climate and its unsafe environment? Which members of Congress are best to address these fearful issues to be safe both for the nonprofit and its own constituents? And I think we can broaden the question beyond just artists. But is that something you feel comfortable commenting on?
Yeah, so we don't, we do have some resources on our website for different immigration groups that are helping these different populations, whether it's artists or any other. We don't have a great answer to this though. Every member of Congress needs to hear from their constituents about immigration services and the fear in their communities for it. So every single one should hear that. Texas is extremely important in that, as being a border state. But as for immigration services, we do have some resources. I don't have them off the top of my head, but please check out our website on that. And just reach out to local attorneys and local immigration attorneys are probably the best, and legal aid, those types of organizations. I'm sorry, I know that it's such a horrible area to be in right now. Like, I know how hard it is for immigrant services.
I'm going to give you them in order, okay? Do you think the general philanthropic landscape will become more competitive?
I'm gonna guess that that's asking like competitive by nonprofits to access funding versus competition between philanthropy. And yes and no. We have seen some philanthropy step up big. We have seen others run and hide. And so for the ones that are running and hide, yeah, that is becoming more competitive. For the ones that are stepping up big, people are starting to hear about it, so there's more competition there. We are calling on philanthropy to start to step up more, and so hopefully there is a little bit of a turn there. But I think there is action in the philanthropy to start doing more. And we know that philanthropy can't fill this gap, right? If they removed all this federal funding, trillions of dollars of federal funding, there's no way philanthropy could fill that gap. And so that is something that we're trying to really make sure Congress knows about, so that philanthropy can be serving nonprofits in other ways and not be focused on trying to fill the government gap.
Well, somebody asked whether or not you said that nonprofit 501c3 clinics.
Yes, so
would they be taxed?
Yeah, so in the reconciliation menu, there is one of the options would be to remove tax deductible donations for health clinics or health clinics, basically. I haven't heard of that actually coming to fruition yet, but it was on the what's called the reconciliation menu.
Okay. I'm not sure if we want to comment on this, but let me read the question. Whoops, I lost the question. This person would love to hear your thoughts on the efficacy and need for public protests and other forms of public mobilization and making change on these issues facing nonprofits versus contacting individual congressional members directly.
There's need for all of these different types of mobilization and advocacy. We don't really take a whole lot of position on quote unquote protests. But we really like to focus on advocacy from who can I talk to today to advance my mission. That's what we see advocacy is. Sharing with your community and sharing with your members of Congress. If you feel the need to be organizing and assembling, that is an individual organization's decision, I would say.
All right. Any guidance for nonprofits who aren't federally funded but receive corporate funding, and those corporate funders do receive federal funding? So the funding impact and executive order directives does trickle down to the nonprofit.
So the funding impacting executive order directives does trickle down. Corporate funders do receive federal funding. I'm not really sure how to answer that one. So I think if you as a nonprofit do not receive federal funds, you should reach out to your members of Congress and say that. If there's pushback saying, well, some of your corporate funders receive federal funds, that I would say that that's an arm's length relationship, and that's separate from your relationship. And explain that is how I would go about it. But I'm not real sure about if those corporate funders are receiving funding and that funding is being cut off, if this is the question. And so you are going to start losing funding because someone else has lost funding. You can also explain that. I think there is confusion by members of Congress on how this all works. And so there needs to be some education on showing that, oh, you don't think you're affecting me, but this is how it directly affects me. And so I think there needs to be some explanation there. So 2 answers to that question. Hopefully one of those answers actually answers the question you're asking.
You're like an answer machine here, okay? Here comes another one. All right. Are you expecting nonprofits that are affiliated with religious entities to be targeted in some ways? And the person goes on to say that seems to be a third rail for many GOP officials.
Good question. So religious serving nonprofits they're being treated differently under this administration. Why I bring this up is because there's an executive order that is creating the office of faith-based, the faith office, the White House faith office. It used to be the faith-based office of something, something, something under Biden. Most administrations have this office that serves religious organizations inside the White House. President Trump just renamed it. The difference is that this White House office is specific to mostly white evangelical churches, separate from previous administrations that were kind of all religions. In that order, it also said that this office is to make recommendations on how faith-based organizations could access federal funding just like other nonprofits, which is new and different compared to other previous administrations. And usually there's a separation of church and state questions on funding religious organizations. So it's treating organizations, it's treating different religions differently, and providing access in different ways. To the question about the Catholic Church and immigration populations, Then we get into the immigration question, right? And immigration has been, as we've been talking about, targeted very specifically in various ways, um, in a lot of different ways. And so I don't think it matters if it's a religious organization or not when it comes to immigration. If you're in immigration services, that is being targeted regardless of your religious affiliation.
Okay, folks, we have about 7 minutes left. Are there any other questions?
I did want to say thank you to everyone for being so patient with me and Zoe. And I really want to say thank you to the person who mentioned that they have a helper and a baby carrier. So we're all in this together. Thanks for understanding.
Well, I think that it humanizes things and really puts it in perspective, because I think what we all need to be concerned about is not just what's happening now, but what the impact are going to be on youngsters in the future in terms of the changes that are taking place, without getting involved in the political elements. The world that we're used to is being radically changed. And as such, we need to be concerned whether those changes are benefiting or not benefiting the populations we serve. So it's good to have your daughter there as a reminder. I'm sure she brings other reasons for being around as well. So
Absolutely.
I just want to then end by thanking Tiffany for a fantastic presentation. I want to thank Mission Capital, and I live here, I give here, for joining us in making this possible. This is such an important topic. We felt we ought to be doing it collaboratively and together to bring it to the community. We will do more of this as things develop. And I want to thank all of you for joining us. And I hope you found it a worthwhile hour. And as they say in some movie, go forth and do good. All right. Thank you, Tiffany.
So much.